Hi everybody, this is a week one introduction to HTML CSS. It's meant to accompany the other elements that are in your folder for week one. So let's dive right into it. HTML, the acronym stands for Hypertext Markup Language. One thing you should know is that when we hear coding and programming and scripting, we hear terms like that. HTML is nothing more than markup. So when you're writing HTML, sure, you're coding, but you're not programming. You're not scripting. There's no real logic. I want you to think of HTML as the same as if you submitted an English paper and your teacher handed you back red marks on it. That teacher marked up your paper. You are marking up a web document. That's what it is. So it's a markup language used to create the content and semantic structure of web pages. So it's not just what you see. Content is what you see. Semantic means that everything has meaning. In other words, if I were to have an e-commerce site or a restaurant website that had a Google map with directions, we need to not only communicate the map and the directions, but also communicate to machine learning, to Google itself, that, hey, this is a map and these are specific directions, and therefore it's not traditional content. So Google or any other search engine that indexes it should put it into the directions result if someone searches for directions to that restaurant. So in this course, we'll be experimenting with all sorts of ways to style our content. That's the CSS part, but the HTML part is really about communicating not only to people what elements are, but to screen readers for people who are maybe visually challenged. So semantic simply means meaning. We have to not only structure our content, but convey what type of content it is. That's a big part of the modern web. So just know that a web page is comprised of numerous elements, and each of which will have a particular meaning in the context of the web page. They could be a title, they could be a headline, they could be an image, they could be an article or a section. And that's where the web is headed. We want to now convey meaning. Whereas in the first 15 or 20 years of the web, a lot of it was just making our stuff look good. So in this course, you'll see that I tend to use Chrome. I'm fine with whatever you use. Your work will be tested in the last two versions of Safari, Chrome, IE, Firefox. You'll learn about each of the rendering engines for each one of these browsers. They're different. They all belong to similar families, though. So the web browser, of course, is to read HTML documents. I sort of assume that if you're signing up for this course, you would know that because you're interested in how the web works and you're getting into this, possibly this field. So the browser will render the tags but not display them. So when we use markup, all the things inside our tags are what the browser sees. So your job as an HTML programmer, I shouldn't use that word, but an HTML coder in this case, is to communicate with the browser and tell the browser exactly what you want to happen and how the browser should interpret the content of the page. So now let's dive into tags. If you've ever looked at the source code of an HTML page, you may have seen greater than and less than signs. So HTML tags are keywords, tag names surrounded by angle brackets, as you see on this slide. A less than, some letters, and then a closing tag or a greater than tag. So they usually come in pairs. So in that second bullet point, you see an example of a bold tag, which is a B. And if we were to use that tag and put some text in between it, the browser would render the content in the middle to be bold. So the first tag in a pair is the start tag, the second tag is the end tag. So not all tags come in pairs, but most of them do. So know that the end tag is written like the start tag, but has a / before the tag name. These are fundamental things. So take as long as you need on this first presentation, because this is going to be your Bible for the rest of the course and the rest of the program if you stay on for more courses. So an HTML element would be everything in between that start tag and the end tag. So this example is what we call a header tag, and it's an H1. H1 means it's the largest heading tag that's offered. We'll get into this later. This is just an overview, but we have H1 through H6, H6 being the smallest of the header tags. And this HTML element has an H1 opening tag and an H1 closing tag. So all the text in the middle is the element, and it would be styled with a very large, bold styling. Now, in our web page, HTML elements can have what we call attributes. And attributes provide additional information and also tell the browser how to use the content that we present. Know that attributes are always specified inside the start tag. So if you look at the bottom here, you see a div tag is opened. You see the less than div, and then you see a couple of attributes. You see ID attribute and a style attribute. We don't see that start tag close until after the semicolon where we designate our background color to be the hexadecimal 000. Now, if you've never heard of hexadecimals before, don't worry about it. All you're responsible for in this slide is the fact that attributes come inside the starting tag. So we've applied two attributes to the div, an ID and a style. And in our image tag below, which is img, we have four attributes. We have a source, the source of our image, an alt or alternative text tag, and that's for screen readers who maybe, if you're visually challenged, you can't see a picture. The alt tag is what the screen reader would read to the person who's visually challenged. We have a width and height attribute as well. So notice in the image tag, there is no closing tag. The image tag is one of those rare tags that actually is self-closing. So most come in pairs, some don't. But regardless, all attributes will be inside the opening tag. So in this case, we're showing they come in name value pairs. We have an example of a div ID, a div tag, and an image tag. The most essential tags will be in every web page that you ever create. And here are some on the slide. The first one is HTML. Now this would encompass your entire web page and tells the browser that this page is an HTML document. We'd also have a title tag, a head tag, a body tag, a link tag that brings in different files from external sources. And we also have a script tag. The last one is a style tag. So these are the basics that will be in every script that you do. Now they all have, in this case, closing tags. So know this, you're only looking at the opening tags in this case. So this is an example of a basic structure of an HTML document. We have an HTML tag that's closed, and that at the end of the document, and that tag encompasses everything in a web page. So from a bigger sense, you're getting a feel now that we're communicating with the browser that everything inside opening and closing tags are defined as that. So we're saying to the browser, hey, everything between the opening HTML tag and the closing HTML tag will be HTML. Then we have a title tag. This is the tag that you see on a browser when you look at a tab. So if you look at the top of the browser, you generally see the page title. This is a really important element as search engines like Google will pay close attention to this title when it categorizes your website. Next, you see a head tag. That head tag is for communicating meta information to outside sources, things like Google again. We spend a lot of time worrying about Google. So in this case, the head tag has a closing head tag. Now the body tag, that's what we call our presentation layer. That's the presentation of everything you see on a web page. Anything you visually see will go in between the opening and body and closing body tags. So that's why you see the asterisks there and the content comes here. So what you'll do a lot of times is start with a template and just work inside the body tag as you start to learn HTML and start to put some tags in and open them up in a browser and see how they work. So in this class, we focus on HTML5, which has been out for a while, but hasn't been done being released. In other words, HTML5 is still being developed. So when you see HTML4, know that there are going to be several deprecated tags and attributes that are used to style documents, and those tags are not supported in HTML5. So generally, if you Google things for answers in this course or you're looking for references, stick with HTML5 only. Avoid using elements like font, center, and strike. That's the bold tag that we showed earlier, the B. Now it's called a strong tag. We'll get into that, but just know that these are all indications that your web page is HTML4. So let's look at some of the more important tags. H1 is a header tag, and regardless of whether it's 1 or 6, it's going to embolden your text. So H1 is going to be the larger font, and H6 will be the smaller. I would highly encourage a lot of experimentation in the first week here. Now P is for paragraph tags. You'll be using this constantly and for the rest of your life. Now ahref tag, A stands for anchor, and ahref is where the user would be directed when they click on what goes inside these AH tags. So that's called an anchor tag, and that's how we make hyperlinks, which as you probably know, are places that users can click on to get to another area. Now, how do we put images in a web page? Well, we use the IMG SRC, which is image source, and we put the location of the image inside those double quotes. Now, div is a division tag. It basically creates a section on your web page. So we use this for layout and structure. Now, you also see in this fifth bullet point the CSS term. That stands for Cascading Style Sheets, which will be a good portion of this course. And that is how we can style the HTML elements that make up our web page. Now, if you ever have used a form on a website, you'll soon learn that the input type defines what we enter into a web page to send data to a server. And in this course, we'll cover this extensively. There will be checkboxes, a text area, which is a larger text input, submit buttons, radio buttons, drop-downs. Everything you need to create a form is inside the input type. And lastly, you see a form tag, which is what we would surround those elements with. So lastly, a note here is that images and inputs do not have closing tags. They're self-closing. So some other important tags are table, which creates a table, tr, which creates a row inside that table, td, which is a table cell, br, which is a line break, and hr, which is a horizontal line. This is very rudimentary HTML, and I recommend you get used to this. These will be replaced by more sophisticated and complicated systems like grids and flex boxes, if you've ever heard of those. But we have to start, as this is an entry-level course, we'll start with tables. Tables are incredibly easy to learn, and they'll help you structure your web page as you get started. So on to cascading style sheets. Now, these are styles that define how we display our HTML elements. And it was introduced a long time ago with old HTML4 to provide a better way to style HTML elements. Right now we're in CSS3, which is we can control everything. We can even animate with CSS now. So what we'll be doing in this course is adding CSS to our HTML, and we can do it a few ways. We can use inline styles, where we actually apply styles to our HTML elements directly, or we can do it internally, where we can use a style element inside the head section of our HTML document. But what we want to do to be more professional is to use it externally. So we'll be growing to a point where we take our styles, we'll put it in a separate file, and we'll link to our web page through that. So that is the preferred way, and it will be useful because if you have a website with multiple pages, we can cache that one CSS file so we don't have to reload it. So there's a lot of reasons why we will do what we do. But when you get started, feel free to experiment with inline styles and internal styles just to make your style attributes understand what they do and how they affect the page. So inline styles, this is an example of it. We've got an H2 tag with a style equals, that's an attribute, and color red. So what we're saying here is that whatever text is inside that tag will be colored with red, and that's for text color only. So it can be used if a unique style is to be applied to one single occurrence of an element, and I would say use it now just to teach yourself. But moving forward, you would take that H2 and probably give it an ID and target it directly. So this is an example of internal style sheets, and this can be used if one single document has a unique style. They're defined in the head tag section, and they use the style tag not the style attribute like the last slide, but the style tag. So here we have style type equals text/CSS, and we have H2 inside that style tag, and we have color blue. So that would color all H2 HTML elements in this web page to have a text color of blue. And lastly, we have external style sheets, which again is the preference. And they enable you to change the appearance and layout of all pages in a website just by adding one single file. Now the beauty of this is more than likely if you have a multi-page website, you're going to have similar and reused elements, which means that you create one page, one template, reuse it for all internal pages, and simply change the content of the page. So the external style sheet would only need to cover one website instead of one file. You do want to have a CSS file extension on these, and each page that uses it must link to the style sheet using the link tag as you see in this image, where we have link rel, which tells you the type of link it is. Link relation is what that is short for. And the href is in the same folder because there's no / there, my-styles.css. The type would be text/CSS, and the media equals screen, which is a default for this, which means that it's only for devices that are screens. So when you use these different types of style applications, there is a priority. The inline style would, of course, be the most have the highest priority of a style, which means if I have an inline style of one specific H2 tag, as shown a few slides ago, that would override similar styles in both an internal style sheet and an external style sheet. There's also something called the important attribute, where we have an exclamation point important, and we can throw that in our styles. It's used with a style attribute to override any other style attributes assigned to an element. So if I had an inline style that colored an H2 tag to be red, and I had an external style sheet down in the priority list, but it had that exclamation point important, then that style would override the one that is in closer proximity, which is in point 1 there, the inline style. So here's an example of CSS syntax. I've got a selector H1, and inside that H1 I've got different properties and values, meaning that all H1 tags will have these properties and these values. So all H1 tags will have a color of hex 09C and a font family of Helvetica. So CSS selectors allow authors to target HTML elements so that they can be styled. So a selector can be a tag, an ID, a class. It's a way of CSS to access the properties of a specific HTML element. This is an example of a type selector. So here we're using it only the element type, and that's it. So we see A. A would be the name of the tag we're targeting. So all anchor tags, all of them, would have the color blue. IMG would mean all images would have the color blue. And H1 would mean all H1 tags. So that's a type selector, and it's all you have to do to grab that is simply take the HTML tag itself, add an opening brace, find your property, add a colon, define a value, add a semicolon, and then close it with a curly brace. Now, one thing I should take note of here is that your text editors are going to do most of the time auto-populating. I use Sublime Text. Mesa College uses brackets a lot, especially on Ground. But you'll notice that this is not going to be as hard as it may seem in this one presentation. Most of the time you're going to get a lot of practice, and you just go in, target your element, and give it some value that styles it. So I'm closing on this slide. A type selector selects every instance of the element type regardless of its position in the document tree. The document tree is nothing more than the HTML document that we showed a few slides ago, where we have HTML, and inside there we have a body tag. That takes a tree-like hierarchy. And it doesn't matter where the A, IMG, or H1 is here, it's going to be below. All right, so CSS uses two specific things effectively to target an HTML element, and that is the ID and the class. Now I'm going to say immediately that it's very important that IDs are always unique. When you have an ID, you shouldn't see let's say I have an ID that equals Chris. I shouldn't see that ID equals Chris anywhere else. Anywhere else. Duplicate IDs are not a good idea. But classes, like let's say you had a class called red text, that can be reused. So ID is unique, class repeated. So the ID selector is used to specify a style for a single unique element, and the class selector can be used for a group of elements. This is a very important slide. So if you didn't understand what I said, just hit the old pause button, go back 35 seconds, reread this, because it's very, very important. So this is an example of the ID selector. And let's say I had a P tag that had an ID of intro. I would access this through using the hashtag intro. This will grab any ID that has intro and apply a color blue to it. And it's similar for news. If I had an ID that equals news inside a P tag or any other type of tag, it doesn't matter. If it's an ID news, whatever it's going to be color blue. The case values are always case sensitive, always, and browsers will interpret A and capital A totally different. So you wouldn't be able to actually style your intended target if it didn't reach that target. Now class selectors again can be groups, they can be repetitious, but we access them through a dot. So instead of the hashtag that we saw in the last slide, which accesses IDs, the dot accesses classes.